is precisely 8:45. This is the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Here's the news edited by J. Yogaraj and read by Ramesh Perez. The headlines. A progressive review meeting was convened to assess the effectiveness of the dengue control programs in the western and central provinces. Sri Lanka Customs records highest ever earnings in a year. State Minister Ranjit Siambalapitiya says tax number was not introduced to impose additional burden on public. The dengue control program to be conducted in Jaffna, Trincomalee and Batticaloa. The government to provide fertilizer for tea cultivation. The asylum application process to kick off by end of this month. And news overseas, air traffic control communication right before Haneda collision released. In sports, Craig to lead Zimbabwe ODI squad against Sri Lanka. Now the local news in detail. A progress review meeting was convened at the Presidential Secretariat chaired by President Ranil Wickremesinghe to assess the effectiveness of the dengue control programs in the western and central provinces. Under the guidance of President's Office and in adherence to existing health guidelines, collaborative efforts involving the armed forces and police have successfully curtailed the spread of dengue in these regions. The discussion revealed that the implementation of various dengue control and awareness programs, particularly focusing on Medical Officer of Health divisions, has effectively brought the situation under control. During the meeting, it was acknowledged that while the spread of dengue has been contained in the western and central provinces, attention should be directed towards districts such as Jaffna, Trincomalee and Batticaloa. Specific areas with high incidences of dengue around government institutions, schools, religious sites, public spaces and private institutions were identified for targeted preventions. Sri Lanka Customs has achieved a record revenue exceeding 900 billion rupees in 2023, according to Customs media spokesman Sivali Arugada. The department has earned 970 billion rupees last year, marking the highest annual total in its history. The revenue collected for 2023 was 138% higher than that of 2022, he said. Initially set a target of 1,217 billion rupees for 2023 by the Ministry of Finance. The target was later cut down to 893 billion rupees due to the economic challenges. Despite this being the highest annual revenue ever recorded, it's worth noting that in 2018, Sri Lanka Customs has also achieved a revenue of 923 billion rupees. State Minister of Finance Ranjit Siambalapitiya has clarified that while there is a legal provision indicating a 50,000 rupees fine for non-compliance with tax identification number requirements, this provision has not been enforced. Speaking to the media on Wednesday, Siambalapitiya explained that the decision to make the TIN compulsory for individuals over the age of 18 aims to boost state income for the country's future. The State Minister asserted, however, that such measures are not intended to impose an extra burden on the populace. This news broadcast comes to you from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation. Continuing with more local news. The application process for the welfare scheme Aswasama will kick off towards the end of the month, the Finance Ministry said. State Minister of Finance Shan Sewasinghe announced this week that the process will be initiated by the end of January or the beginning of February 2024. The December installment of 1,410,064 beneficiaries has already been disbursed, and the government aims to extend these benefits to a total of 2 million people. The Ministry of Agriculture and Plantation Industries has decided to provide the fertilizer required for tea cultivation in Sri Lanka through two state fertilizer companies, Colombo Commercial Fertilizer Company and the Ceylon Fertilizer Company. Until now, the Ceylon Tea Board has given loans to the tea growers to purchase the fertilizers required for tea cultivation from the private sector, and the tea growers had to pay a higher price for that. It was also reported that some tea growers do not use fertilizers and use the money for other purposes. Therefore, Minister of Agriculture and Plantation Industry, Mr. Mahinda Amaravira, instructed the Ceylon Tea Board to carry out this decision. The annual fertilizer requirement for tea cultivation in Sri Lanka is 40,000 metric tons. The amount spent for that is about 6,800 million rupees. And that concludes local news.
The main news story is brought to you by Sinhala Mahatma.
Moving on to the main news story. The first parliamentary sitting of 2024 is slated to commence on the 9th of January, Acting Secretary-General of Parliament Chaminda Kularatne said. Accordingly, the Parliament is scheduled to meet from 9th to the 12th of January as per a decision made by the Committee on Parliamentary Business on 12th of December 2023. And that was the main news story.
The main news story was brought to you by Sinhala Mahatma.
This is Watchlight.
And in Watchlight, the National Dengue Control Unit announced that the average number of daily dengue cases detected in the country has increased to 335 last month. A total of 8,728 dengue patients have been reported in the last 25 days, the NDCU said. Altogether, 85,216 cases had been reported from 1st of January to the 25th of December 2023, they said. Most of the dengue cases are reported from the Western Province. And that came to you in Watchlight.
Coming up, World News.
Moving on to the World News Bulletin. First, the headlines. Air traffic control communication right before Haneda collision released. Rescue operations in race against time to save quick hit victims. Gautam Adani, India court declines new inquiry against billionaire. And now the world news in detail. Japan's Transport Ministry has released the transcript of communication between air traffic control and two aircrafts involved in Tuesday's fatal collision on a runway at Tokyo Haneda Airport. It shows air traffic control did not clear a Japan Coast Guard plane to enter the runway. A Japan airline passenger jet collided with the Coast Guard plane at around 6 p.m. on Tuesday, soon after it touched down. Both were engulfed in fire. The transcript made public on Wednesday evening shows that at 5:43 p.m. or 4 minutes before the collision, air traffic control instructed the JAL jet to continue its approach to the runway. Air traffic control also informed the aircraft at the time that there would be a departing plane. More than 60 people are confirmed dead in Monday's devastating earthquake in Ishikawa Prefecture, central Japan. Tens of thousands are still without electricity. Japanese Prime Minister Kishida Fumio says emergency teams are in a race against time to save lives. Rescue operations are ongoing throughout Ishikawa, where officials say at least 65 people are confirmed dead. India's top court has rejected pleas to set up a new panel to investigate a U.S. firm's allegations of fraud against billionaire Gautam Adani's companies. In January, Hindenburg Research has accused the firm of brazen stock manipulation and accounting fraud. The court set up a committee in March to oversee an investigation by India's market regulator into the allegations. Back to the headlines of the world news. Air traffic control communication right before Haneda collision released. Rescue operations in race against time to save quick hit victims. And Gautam Adani, India court declines new inquiry against the billionaire. And that was world news. Moving on to development news, the Pathfinder Foundation has formed a study group of experts to develop a blueprint and framework aimed at doubling Sri Lanka's economic growth rate through accelerated economic integration and infrastructural connectivity with India. The framework document is expected to be formally launched in March 2024. Most economic forecasts place Sri Lanka on an average growth trajectory of 3% per annum for the next decade. Such an anemic decade. And that was Developer News.
Moving on with sports news.
Moving on to sports, it's cricket. Craig Erwin, who missed the home series against Ireland last December due to injury, returns to lead the ODI side, while Shrikanta Rasa will captain the T20 side against Sri Lanka, commencing on January the 6th. Kusal Mendes will be the ODI captain, while Wanidhu Hasaranga will be the new T20 captain. Dasun Chanaka, the previous skipper, most probably will play both ODI and T20 games as a middle-order batsman, as he is in top form in the recent major club limited overs cricket matches. The Zimbabwe team will arrive today.
Go ekatiyana youth ekata life eke change ekata niyameta set penna aswagena denga puhina habe karana youth ekata niyameta set penna friendship eka menna.
The all-new NSB Itru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
And in business news, the Urban Development Authority made a profit of 1,890 million rupees last year, said Chairman UTA Nimesh Herath at their head office Setsiripai Battaramulla, while officials commenced their business for 2024. He said with the country now waking up from the economic crisis on a better economic footing, and due to these discussions are currently underway to restart many projects that were stopped due to COVID-19 and the economic crisis. He emphasized that more attention has been given to housing projects and city development projects. And that was Business News.
Business News, sponsored by National Savings Bank, the safest place for your money.
Go ekatiyana youth ekata life eke change ekata niyameta set penna aswagena denga puhina habe karana youth ekata niyameta set penna friendship eka menna.
The all-new NSB Itru account, NSB IAM, a plan for your dream.
Moving on to economic news, two investors have positively responded to invest over US $100 million in the Colombo Port City, and the cabinet approval has been granted to them as a primary business of strategic importance. The first proposal has been submitted by Asari Port City Hospital Private Company to implement a project to develop a hospital in the Port City of Colombo under an investment of $100 million. The project qualifies for exemptions or incentives under 2B of Colombo Port City guidelines. And that was economic news.
Weather Report.
And finally, moving on to the weather report, the Met Department says a few showers will occur in the eastern, central and over provinces. Showers or thunder showers will occur at several places in the western and Sabaragamuwa provinces and in the Galle and Mathura districts. Misty conditions can be expected at some places in the western, Sabaragamuwa and central provinces during the morning. And that was the weather report. And to conclude this news broadcast, a recap of the main news headlines. A progress review meeting was convened to assess the effectiveness of the dengue control programs in the western and eastern provinces. Sri Lanka Customs records highest ever earnings in a year. State Minister Ranjit Simbalapitiya says tax identification number was not introduced to impose additional burden on the public. Dengue control program to be conducted in Jaffna, Trincomalee and Batticaloa. The government to provide fertilizer for tea cultivation. The Aswasma application process to kick off by end of this month. And in news overseas, air traffic control communication right before Haneda collision released. And in sports, Craig to lead Zimbabwe ODI squad against Sri Lanka. And with that, we conclude this news broadcast from the Sri Lanka Broadcasting Corporation.